Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, one last one here for this particular entry or this series. This time it's not really based on your suggestions, but it was based on somebody who had posted a comment on one of my recent videos. It goes to show that I do really try to check out every single comment that comes every single day. I don't really respond to them that much as I should. It takes a lot of work really still to try to respond to everyone, but I do read them because the main reason is I love reading what you have to say, and at the same time it's a good litmus test of where things are going, whether something is good, whether something is bad, something needs help, something is perfect, that kind of stuff. And in this case, somebody recommended or actually made a comparison to a cryptid that I've never heard of before, and very, very fascinating stuff. It follows along the themes of one of my favorite cryptids that I've ever done, which was the Genius Loki. I know I keep mentioning it throughout several videos, but it's that good. And in this case, it has to do with a cryptid that's very, very similar. Not quite as evil, but in most cases not even evil at all, but still very similar. So that's why I'm going to talk about it here. So as always, please, it goes to show, keep up with your comments, keep posting them throughout your videos, and I do read them. So definitely much appreciated. So the cryptid I'm talking about here has to do with something called the Orang Bunian, and I hope I'm saying that right, the Orang Bunian. Sometimes it's just known as the Bunian, and so for the sake of this video, that's what I'm going to refer it as just simply the Bunian. And what it is essentially it's some kind of entity, whether it's considered supernatural, paranormal, or more on the lines of something involving a cryptid, who knows, but it's something that's essentially people. It's us. It's humans. But they don't live on the same dimension that we do. They live in a slightly different dimension. Think of it like if you're listening to a radio station on the radio, and you're listening, and I'm just throwing out a radio station like 95.7, you can perfectly hear that perfectly fine, but twist it a little bit and suddenly the sound starts distorting until finally you can get to the point where it turns to another radio station. Well, same concept, but here think of it like dimensions. It's just they actually live in the same earth that we do, same places that we do. In fact, there have been instances that people have said that these Bunian live in the same houses that those people do. The only difference is because they live in that separate dimension or whatever it is, then they're not seen by people, but them, the Bunian, do see us. So quite strange, quite weird when you think about it. But when it comes to these particular cryptids, the Bunian, for the most part, they are not seen by people. But yeah, that's what they're called. They're known as the hidden people or the whistling people in some cases. I'm not really sure why they're called the whistling people, because I can't find anything that specifically states something to the effect of them, like let's say having a characteristic as far as whistles, but they're known as that. And then others just simply call them like a loose variation or a loose form of elves. But in all cases, these particular Bunian are humans and have human characteristics. They're about 98% human. I'm just throwing out like a percentage of how close they are. The key differences though are this. Their ears seem to be more along the lines of pointed ears. Think of them like Vulcan ears, Spock-like ears. And they also seem to have like when you think of, let's say, anything involving like the Lord of the Rings movies, or anything involving like I think it was called Legend, those films where people dressed a certain way, kind of like in an almost not regal-like manner, but definitely something that's more fantasy-oriented, maybe even sci-fi-oriented, but more fantasy-oriented really. That's how they traditionally dress. So two key differences when it comes to that. Now, as far as the Bunians and where they came from and essentially how they came to be, here's how it goes. Apparently they had a home and you'll see a picture of it here, that's the Pulau Arur. I hope, God, these names, I hope I'm saying it right. But that's the location, or Aur Island, where these Bunians came from, and they dominated there. Like that's where their main home base could be considered. And eventually humans came to be around them and found them because, as I was mentioning earlier, they're completely like invisible to people, but there are some humans, some people that do see them, and these are the ones that are considered to have like that special eyesight, that special ability to see beyond, let's say, normal human range. Kind of like, how you have people that say they're clairvoyant or they're able to see more along the lines of supernatural aspects. Same concept, but in this case, these are people that can see, though, like these Bunians. They're considered to have more along the lines of spiritual sight, is how it's referred. And so the idea is, once the Bunians realized that people were able to notice them, a few rarer people, then they decided, the Bunians, that yeah, maybe they could help these people out there at that island. How they helped them out was this. Apparently the Bunians had come across a shipwrecked Chinese boat that had a whole bunch of goods. What it was, I don't know, but you could imagine it along the lines of stuff like diamonds, riches, golds, whatever. And so they hid it there in their island, but the people that would come by, that saw them, somehow knew that that cave that they hid it in contained those treasures, and the people were asking for it. But the Bunians said no. The real way to get to that treasure was they had to perform some kind of ritual. Do this ritual or do some kind of offering, and the Bunians would be nice enough to open that cave. How, probably along the lines of something supernatural, who knows? But it would essentially open up the cave, and then they would allow those people to obtain those goods. But the key thing was, these goods were only on loan. It wasn't though for the people to have on a permanent basis. But knowing how human nature is, whenever somebody is given something and told, please, be sure to bring it back later on, this is only temporary, you can only imagine that a lot of people reneged on that particular offer and kept it. And they kept it by actually fleeing the island itself, kind of probably suspecting that the Bunians were not able to leave that island and try to chase them afterward. So with the Bunians realizing that this is essentially how human nature is going to be, then that's when they decided that they're going to leave that island. Who knows if they left their stuff there? No particular tales that I've found that show anything involving like somebody being able to find that cave. But eventually the Bunians dispersed throughout the world, and then that's how various areas, especially towards the Asian cultures, they're the ones that cite the Bunians being marked throughout various locations there in the Asian world. Now, with regards to the Bunians and how they interact with people, as I mentioned at the very beginning, for the most part, they're pretty nice to humans. Like they're not out there to cause mischief or to cause harm, not unlike a lot of the other cryptids and monsters that I've talked about in the past. Rather, they seem to be there just minding their own business. They realize that most people do not see them and aren't going to see them. It's just those with the spiritual sight that do so, that that they interact with. But even then, they interact with them in a nice manner. In fact, it's been said that with these Bunians, their main thing is to try to do like something where they could either befriend or assist those particular humans, probably doing stuff that people ask for. This, by the way, is the way to attract the attention of a Bunian. If you know, for example, that that there is, let's say, a suspected location involving these particular cryptids, what you have to do is you have to approach this location, and those locations are generally found in the same foresty type areas because for the most part, while I mentioned that these Bunians may live among humans and in some cases straight in their homes, for the most part they tend to live in the forests, according to what I read. But if you suspect that someone is nearby and you're interested in seeing like what kind of favors they could do for you, or because again these are beings that are somewhat supernatural and could have some powers, the best way to do is this. All you have to do is approach that location and then speak very, very nicely to them, and then ask them your particular request. The idea is the Bunians are there. You can't see them, but they can see you. And the idea is, if you ask them nice enough, and if you do it over several times, then you may actually start getting a response. And then sometimes this response is that the Bunians are going to do your thing, or they'll say, okay, we need something. We need something on the lines of an offering, or please perform this following ritual, and then you'll be able to get it. Very, very similar, no, to like the early tales on that island of the people that were trying to get those treasures. No, it seems like the Bunians are pretty much doing the same thing all this time later. Another way apparently to try to get the Bunians to do your asking is to threaten them, or make some kind of bartering agreement. Although it does not seem like this is something that works too often, which makes sense. I mean, if you really wanted somebody like the Bunians or some things like them to cooperate with you and use their powers to help you, what better way to do so than to ask nicely? And what worse way to get things essentially stopped and then to threaten them, so that is not really recommended. As far as again the locations that the Bunians frequent or live at, again I was talking about the forest, but another interesting thing is that they apparently also live near cemeteries and empty buildings, which kind of makes sense because if they're trying to, let's say, stay away from people altogether, what better way to do so than to have something involving traditional places that people hardly visit, and that is cemeteries and abandoned buildings, no doubt because of all the spookiness tied to those locations. And then as far as how the Bunians live themselves, surprisingly enough, they apparently live just like us as humans. They have their own societies, they have their own towns. Apparently these towns can be still, invisible to the eye, and they live in places where in some cases they're kings and queens, that kind of hierarchy that's still involved, very similar again to something involving the Lord of the Rings. So I'm wondering how much of an experience anybody that loves, for example, Lord of the Rings and then comes across this kind of Bunian world, what that occurs. By the way, that's interesting to pick up. Some people have apparently had physical contact with the Bunians themselves, and here are some of the tales tied to it. The idea is again that these things are completely invisible, but those that have the eyesight and can communicate with them, the Bunians kind of like it, so much so to the point that some of these people join the Bunians in their culture. But here's the interesting that happens. Whenever you have that done, it's been said that whenever you come back from that community, it turns out that they live, not, of course, not just in a separate dimension, but that the separate dimension works in a much different time period. So much so to the point where, for example, there was a tale of a guy who married a Bunian woman and then went to live in that community, but missing his own family back on our dimension. What had happened was when he decided that he wanted to leave and he came back, he suddenly realized that it was many, 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 many years have passed. It's kind of like the tale of Rip Van Winkle. So anything involving their time period, once you step into that location, then you're in a completely different time, and it apparently slows down far more. The time is so much more slower there than what it is here, so that when you come back, many, many years have passed. And then as far as another interaction, has to do with some women who apparently have an agreement done with some Bunian men, and the idea is this: they agree to essentially mate with these Bunian men and have their children, but when the birth is done, the baby is taken by the Bunians. And the idea is that the woman who did this, who made the agreement, the regular Earth woman, the human, what'll happen is she will then be bestowed with some kind of powers herself, or some kind of request, something where the request is strong enough and important enough where it requires the birth of a child in order for that request to be granted. In fact, there was a story with regards to somebody, a mother-to-be, who had the baby, and when the baby was born, that was it. Only the mother's placenta actually appeared. There was no child. The child was invisible. So what happened at that point? That's when somebody that was apparently familiar with Bunian, a professor, by the name of Datuk Zainal Abidin Borhan. He gave an interview to Yahoo Malaysia. He said that in this case, the baby was most probably taken by the Bunian community. In other words, it's kind of a little freaky to think so, but while this mother was having her baby, wherever that location was, there were the Bunians right there with her, watching this, making sure that once the baby was born, they enveloped it somehow, made it invisible, who knows, but they took it right then and there, so much so to the point that when it was born, only pretty much the placenta appeared, and then that was it, or the placenta was made to appear, and that was it. But in actuality, the baby was taken by the Bunians right there. And again, the idea was that the mother was doing this in return for some kind of gifts or some kind of gain, some kind of request that she herself would have because of this large gift that she herself was giving. So very, very interesting stuff. Another one has to do with a hospital university doctor, a psychiatry, the doctor by the name of Ruzana Zamzam. She said the following. She said she encountered this. There was a patient that was 43 years old who only gave the initials as SU. She claimed to be about 4 months pregnant, and she had gone through all of the necessary ultrasound scans and all the images, everything enough to the point to denote that it was going to be a female baby that was going to be born, and anything involving her pregnancy, obviously it was done to the point where with the stomach getting bigger and bigger, there was nothing impairing the judgment that yes, she was going to have a baby pretty soon, and so naturally, 9 months later, that something was going to occur. But just a few days right before her due date, she went to have the mother, she went to have an experience what she claimed was a spiritual event. She was visited by some lady who was preparing her delivery, and that's when somebody, she later explained that somehow, some way, her baby was now lost. And when that happened, then there was an ultrasound done at that point to try to find out what occurred. Again, the baby was not delivered yet by that point, but when the new ultrasound was done, it revealed that the uterus did not have anything in there anymore. Quite freaky stuff, but apparently that's the deal that some of these women have done with the Bunians to ensure that, again, they have something being bestowed upon them, whatever their request, their special request was, later on. Interesting, don't you think? What do you guys think about the Bunians and about their ability to essentially live among us? Like, there could be a Bunian near and around your area right now. It's just that, again, with the way that the frequencies work and their dimensions, you can't see them unless you have that special eyesight. They give it like the shining of some sort, but they can definitely see you. And so if anyone has any more stories tied to anything involving these Bunians, or again their longer name known as the Orang Bunians, then please post your comments, share them below. If it's fascinating to see and hear any such tales to that. Pretty big to when it comes to this notion of the Bunians there in Asia or in Malaysia and anywhere there in those areas. So it'll be fascinating to see if anybody has any more tales tied to it. Alright, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.